This is where it all begins. The foundation of a championship
Swinging
season.
the drive deep to left center, way back by the monster seats and dogs.
On a cold February morning in Boston, the training staff of the Boston Red Sox and representatives of its minor league farm system meet to establish programs for the care and conditioning of the team's professional athletes. Prehab versus rehab is a recurring theme. That attention to physical preparedness, or prehab, significantly reduces strain-related lost-time injuries in professional athletes. Paul Lessard is the head trainer for the Boston Red Sox.
The theory is to try to get your body prepared to do what you're asking it to do. The idea of prehab is to maintain shoulder strength or leg strength, whatever body part we're talking about, so it doesn't get injured, so it doesn't break down.
At Stop and Shop Giant, the work that our associates perform each day, moving, lifting, and placing product, walking on concrete floors, and operating equipment, warrants a worthy comparison to the muscle exertion of professional athletes. They are as susceptible to strain-related injury as any pro ball player.
If I brought one of my pitchers in here to load pallets for 8 hours a day, I'm sure the next day he'd be dying because he's not used to doing that. Conversely, if I brought one of the guys that works the pallet all day long and do a workout that the pitcher has to do on a daily basis, he'd probably be sore. So our bodies kind of get used to doing what you're asking it to do. The problem is, can you get it prepared to do what you're asking it to do? And that's really what we're talking about today.
Stop and Shop Giant is committed to preventing strain-related injuries. Injuries to the neck, shoulder, and lower back. Injuries that can impact your quality of life and limit your ability to make a living. Our campaign against strain begins here. This introduction examines the roles of preparation, conditioning, and wellness. In companion presentations, Paul Lessard shares warm-up and stretching routines that he uses with members of the Boston Red Sox. And our introduction to ergonomics identifies ways by which we have reduced injuries in our stores and distribution centers by continually improving workplace design. Whether you work in a store or distribution center, your job requires strength and a high rate of repetitive motions, especially when lifting and placing product onto store shelves or pallets. These efforts require good cardiovascular fitness. Cardiovascular fitness is the ability of the heart, lungs, and circulatory system to deliver oxygen to your muscles and determines your strength and endurance when performing repetitive, strenuous work. The work you do also requires a superior range of motion and core fitness, that is, the proper conditioning of your back, abdominals or abs, and deep pelvic muscles, the muscle groups most impacted by the work of our industrial athletes.
If they're not strong or they're not flexible, they can't load that pallet or load the shelves or deliver this or whatever the element of work is at that day. If they can't do those things, then obviously they're not productive. Workers are doing the same thing on a day-to-day basis. If they're not maintained mechanically, then there's overuse injuries, overuse issues, and then they're not going to be able to perform the job. Now, the way we train in baseball is totally different than any other sport because of what we're asked to do on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, there's overuse injuries and there's lost time.
With our campaign against strain, Stop and Shop Giant is committed to be proactive, to train its associates on proper core fitness, conditioning, good nutrition, and recovery, so they can stay in the game, avoid lost-time injuries, and be productive members of our team. Common sense tells us that the risk of strain on major muscle groups decreases with a proper warm-up and stretching routine. A multi-dimensional warm-up, about 10 minutes, is all an industrial athlete needs to start blood flowing to important muscle groups.
It doesn't really have to be an extensive program. I mean, you can get a nice warm-up program in a 10-minute window that can get your body ready to do what you're asking it to do. It doesn't have to be a strenuous exercise. It doesn't have to be where you're full lather after a workout and then start working. No, all you're doing is trying to wake up those muscles.
Like many of our associates, baseball players are second shift workers. Travel schedules and night games throw off internal clocks and require players to pay close attention to nutrition and sleep habits.
There needs to be a rest and recovery period built in there somewhere. After their shift, they go home and they have dinner and play with their families and go to bed. But what are they doing for recovery?
Recovery from a day's work and preparation for the day ahead begins at home. Keep your life in balance. Each day, give yourself the opportunity to recover from the physical demands of your job. It's about feeling your best. Proper diet and nutrition to fuel your muscles, a good breakfast to kickstart your metabolism, plenty of water throughout the day, and of course, a good night's sleep.
It's probably as important as a maintenance program. If you're not well rested, the next day you're not going to be able to perform because your body is going to not be ready to do what you're asking it to do.
Staying away from junk food and keeping hydrated throughout the day is very important.
Water basically is the key to our body. I mean, about 80% of our muscle is fluid. If you don't replenish that fluid, then your body is essentially smaller. If that muscle is smaller, then it's essentially weaker. And I'm sure that if their body's feeling better about themselves, then they're having a lot more. It's a lot easier to do your job if your body's cooperating. If your body's not cooperating, then you're not really happy at work.
Make your conditioning program one that incorporates a well-maintained body and a healthy spirit. Remember to take time with your friends and family. Take a walk. Work out in a local gym. Read or listen to your favorite music.
Really, like I said, it's just really more of a thought process than anything else. It's got to be a way of life that you're trying to promote, not only good work habits, but just good habits for life.
Join our campaign against strain. Just as professional athletes rely on conditioning and preparation, with small changes to your daily routine, you can be part of a winning team. In this installment of our series, Campaign Against Strain, experts in the field of ergonomics and health education, Kathleen Nelson and Glenn Orser, explore ways to enrich your lives through the early detection and treatment of strain-related discomfort before it becomes an injury, and the role of proper nutrition, sleep, and exercise in performing to your full potential.
My name is Kathleen Nelson. I'm a physical therapist and an ergonomic specialist. I've been a PT for 25 years and I specialize in the treatment of occupational injuries. When individuals have initial symptoms, they don't realize that it's going to lead to a real potential injury, and those symptoms usually are burning discomfort, sometimes a tingling type of sensation. They feel a level of discomfort, not always a sharp shooting pain, but those are really early warning signs as they're performing a job that may lead to a further musculoskeletal injury. You know, we often ask patients on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? 0 or 1 is really nothing, and 10 is take me to the emergency room, I can't take the pain anymore. So when we're looking at discomfort, generally individuals that would tell me that they had a 2 or a 3, really that's a level of discomfort. When you start getting into a 4, 5, 6, that's really when they're in pain. Pain is usually descriptive words, and you will say that sharp, it's shooting, it's killing me. If individuals are saying that, that's pain. Discomfort is more a sore, achy feeling that they would just feel that something wasn't quite right, but they tend to ignore it because they think it's just going to go away. What we ask individuals to do is follow something called RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Rest in the sense that we don't want an individual to go home if they're feeling a sore, achy back or elbow or shoulder and lift weights and run a marathon. We'd like to give it a moment of rest. Ice, to put ice on that area for a good 10 to 15 minutes. They can take crushed up ice in a Ziploc bag, put it on that area, put a face cloth or even a pillowcase over that to protect the skin. Sometimes I'll even tell individuals to put a frozen bag of vegetables right on that area. And compression, just a little bit of an ACE wrap or a splint or anything that will help to protect the area. And elevation, to raise, especially if it's the limb, the ankle or the knee, to lift that limb higher than their heart. So lying down on a lazy boy with their leg propped up or on the couch with their leg elevated will help to reduce some of the swelling in that area. Generally, we like to have them take an anti-inflammatory like an ibuprofen. But you don't want to just lie down and not move it. You want to have a little bit of very gentle motion and movement to keep the body part moving and help to facilitate blood flow to the area, which will help to decrease the swelling and help that muscular injury recover from the strain that it's undergone. In terms of pain or true injury, that's when an individual, they cannot move the body part, they can't put weight on it, you notice excessive swelling, bruising. That's a real indication that they've had an injury and they really do need to seek out their healthcare provider. One of the best things they can do is to inform their supervisor, their safety officer, and individual on site to acknowledge that they've had an injury, so that they can come in and assess the area, do an ergonomic assessment, and identify if there's a risk for anybody else getting hurt as well.
In addition to proactively addressing the signs and symptoms of a strain-related injury, it's important to make healthful lifestyle choices to keep yourself in the game. Glenn Orser is a health educator and ergonomic specialist.
Let's start with nutrition. Understanding food is a big part of good health. There's a wonderful website called mypyramid.gov, and the United States Department of Agriculture has broken food into 6 major categories. Let's take a look at those 6 categories. One of those food categories are vegetables, and we'd like you to make smart choices about the vegetables that you're eating. We'd like you to consider more green leafy vegetables like broccoli and lettuce and spinach. We'd like you to eat more orange vegetables like squash and pumpkin and sweet potatoes. We'd like you to consider dry beans and peas like lima and white beans and navy beans, and soybeans, which we get tofu from. Another food category are grains. These include bread, cereal, crackers, rice, and pasta. In order to make smart choices here, we want you to be looking for those products that contain the whole grain label. On the rice side, we want you to think about wild rice or brown rice. Eat a variety of fruits. But you have to be careful about the fruit juices because they do contain a lot of sugars. Another food category is milk, and included in milk is yogurt and cheeses. And the reason they're included is that they have their own category because of the calcium content in them. If you don't eat dairy, make sure that you supplement your diet with more calcium. Meat is a food category. Choose fish, poultry, lean cuts of beef and pork, and bake it, broil it, or grill it. Oils and fats are another food category, and they are confusing. One of the simplest decisions that you can make is to choose those kinds of oils that are liquid at room temperature as opposed to those oils that are solid at room temperature. Liquids are unsaturated, which are healthy for you, and the solids at room temperature are saturated fats, and they're unhealthy for you. Food has calories. At the end of the day, depending on how intense your activities were, if you ate too many calories,